My name is Amelia, and for 28 years I thought my life was a competition I couldn't win. My dad Richard made sure of it. He always made me feel like a second-class citizen to my perfect sister. At a family Christmas dinner, he finally broke me with a single sentence. Honestly, you're a failure. Look at your sister. But he didn't know I had been keeping a secret of my own. A secret that would expose every lie they had ever told and change our family forever. Let me take you back to where it began. Christmas Eve was always a performance, and I was sick of my part. Every year it was the same old song and dance. Dad Richard would inevitably steer the conversation toward a verbal boxing match between me and my sister Isabel. He would make some seemingly innocent comment that was actually a gut punch, and I was expected to just take it. But this year, the script felt different, colder. Isabel had just been promoted to project manager at Evergreen Financial, and my parents had been singing her praises for weeks. They were practically radiating smugness, especially my dad, who kept using the word ambition to describe her. He said it with a certain emphasis as if it were a quality Isabel possessed and I decidedly did not. Mom Caroline would join in adding that I had chosen stability with my job as a software engineer at Tech Solutions. The word was a dagger disguised as a compliment. It was a subtle but effective way to put me down. They talked as if I was a coward, someone who was too afraid to aim for anything big. I sat there trying to eat my perfectly cooked beef Wellington, which now tasted like ash in my mouth. Isabel across the table in her new emerald green dress was glowing. She talked about her projects and her team, and my parents would nod along, eyes wide with admiration, as if she were the only person in the world to ever achieve anything. My dad's gaze finally landed on me, and his smile vanished. It was a familiar look of disappointment, one that always made me feel like a little girl who hadn't done her chores. "Amelia," he said, his voice dropping, "Isabel has the drive, the courage to climb. You're a software engineer, living a perfectly average life. Honestly, you're a failure. Look at your sister, that was it. The final blow." Something inside me snapped. For almost 6 years I had been the silent, dutiful daughter, the one who earned a good salary and then spent almost all of it to keep everyone else afloat. I paid for their mortgage, which was always a bit tight after my dad's retirement. I paid for Isabel's student loans because she needed to focus on her career. I paid for her car payments, her credit card bills, even her vacations. I was an open checkbook, an ATM with no fees. My self-worth had been systematically dismantled piece by piece, all to prop up the image of my family's perfect life. This Christmas dinner was supposed to be a time for peace for family, but it was just another stage for their performance. I knew in that moment that if I didn't stop this now, it would never end. I took a shaky breath, the cold air hitting my lungs like a shock. I placed my fork and knife down with a deliberate clink. The small sound echoed in the sudden silence of the room. "You're right," I said, my voice shockingly calm. "We should look at her." Isabel's face clouded with confusion, but my parents' eyes lit up. They thought I was finally surrendering, that I was about to give a teary-eyed speech about how proud I was of my sister. But I continued, my voice gaining strength. "We should also look at the numbers." I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick file, the manila folder worn and creased from being carried around for days. It wasn't a single paper, but a meticulously organized report documenting every single payment, every transfer, every single dollar I had spent on this family. I placed it on the table with a soft thud right between the glazed ham and my mom's famous mashed potatoes. "You talk about ambition and sacrifice," I said, my voice now loud and clear, echoing with 6 years of suppressed anger. "But you don't talk about who's really been sacrificing. Since I was 21, I've been this family's personal ATM. Your mortgage, Isabel's student loans, her car payments, even your last trip to Las Vegas that you said you won from a raffle. It was all me." I opened the file, pointing to the neatly organized columns. "The total is $250,000. I've spent all my savings on you, on this house, on this family." The change on my dad's face was instant and dramatic. The proud, confident grin he had worn all night twisted into a snarl. My mom's mouth hung open, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and betrayal. Isabel, who had been listening with an expression of confused horror, now stared at the report, her eyes darting across the numbers. She had no idea I had been paying for her debts. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum where all the festive chatter had been just moments before. I had exposed their lies. I had ripped off the facade of our perfect family and revealed the rotten core underneath. My dad was the first to speak, his voice, a low, dangerous rumble. "Amelia, what is the meaning of this? You're being dramatic." "Family helps family." He reached for the report, but I snatched it away. "This isn't helping," I replied, my hands shaking, but my resolve firm. "This is exploitation. You've been using me for years. You've been stealing my future, my financial independence, all to create an image of success for Isabel." I stood up, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "And I'm done. Starting tonight, I'm not giving you another dime. And I'm not coming back." I put my napkin on the table and turned away. I could feel their stunned, angry stares boring into my back, but I didn't look. I just walked. I walked past the beautifully decorated Christmas tree, out the front door, and into the cold night air. The icy wind felt like a breath of fresh air, a cleansing sensation after years of suffocation. I got into my car and drove away, leaving behind the Christmas lights, the fake smiles, and the people who had taken everything from me. The car felt like a sanctuary, a warm metal bubble of safety. My hands were shaking so hard on the steering wheel that I had to pull over for a moment, the headlights illuminating the quiet, snow-dusted streets of Austin. The high of the confrontation had already begun to fade, replaced by a cold wave of fear and doubt. What had I just done? I had ruined Christmas. I had shattered the illusion of our family's happiness, for everyone, not just for myself. I told myself it was for the best, that I couldn't go on pretending, but a small, fearful voice in the back of my mind kept whispering, "You're alone now. You have no family." The words my dad had said echoed in my head. "You're a failure." It had been a lifetime of subtle jabs like that, always followed by a request for money. I remembered when I landed my first big job at Tech Solutions. I was so proud. I'd worked my way through college, taking on odd jobs and living on ramen noodles, to graduate with no debt. I was ready to start my life. My parents celebrated, of course, but it wasn't for my sake, it was for theirs. A month after I started, they called me. "The mortgage is a bit tight this month, my mom," said, her voice dripping with sugar. "Would you mind just covering it this one time?" That one time turned into every month. The $1,200 a month felt like a punishment, a tax on my supposed good fortune. Then Isabel came along, the family star. She was just starting her last year of college, and she wanted to go to an expensive private university. My parents, of course, couldn't say no. "She needs the best to succeed," my dad told me, as if my state school degree was a consolation prize. The student loan bills for her education soon started arriving. They came straight to my parents' house. And who do you think they sent the bill to me? I paid $19,000 for Isabel's tuition money I had planned to save for a down payment on a house. I remembered calling my mom once a few years ago. "Mom, this is getting hard," I told her, my voice full of fatigue. "I barely have enough to cover my own bills." She just laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. "Honey, you're stable. You have a great job. Isabel, she's trying to make a name for herself. She's the ambitious one. You're just being dramatic." Family helps family. It was always the same line, the line that justified every single request, every single demand. It was a weapon they used to make me feel guilty for even considering my own well-being. The Las Vegas trip was the final straw. My parents announced they had won a raffle at a charity event, a fully paid trip to a fancy casino in Las Vegas. I remember thinking how lucky they were. That was before I found their credit card statement. A few weeks later, a new bill arrived in my email, one of my dad's credit card bills. It was for $9,000, almost every cent of it from that Las Vegas trip. It wasn't a raffle prize. They had paid for it, and then they had sent me the bill. My $250,000 wasn't a random number. It was a meticulously calculated total of all the things I'd paid for over the years. things I had painstakingly gathered from their mail and my own bank statements. The mortgage, Isabel's tuition, her car payments, their credit card debt. I had a file of every single transaction. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Mom. I let it ring. Then Dad called. Then Isabel. Then a text from Mom. Amelia, let's talk about this. Don't be so dramatic. Another text from Dad. You're embarrassing us. This isn't over. Then a text from Isabel. Amelia, what's going on? Why did you say all those things? The old Amelia would have answered. She would have felt guilty and tried to fix things. But I was done. I was done with the guilt. I was done with the excuses. I put my phone on airplane mode and threw it onto the passenger seat. The silence in my car was liberating. I had finally done it. The feeling of fear was still there, but it was mixed with a powerful sense of freedom. My life was finally my own. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't carrying the weight of my family on my shoulders. I was scared, yes, but I was also ready. I had to tell someone who understood. I knew exactly who to call. My best friend Diane had always told me this was coming. She was the one who had always told me I was being exploited. She was the one who would understand, and I knew she was the only one who could help me figure out what to do next. I pulled into my driveway, the relief of being home, immediately followed by the jarring reality that I was completely alone. I didn't know what to do next. It felt like I had jumped off a cliff, and the ground was a very long way down. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over Diane's name. Before I could hit call, my phone buzzed with an incoming text from my mom. I instinctively flinched, but a strange surge of curiosity mixed with my recent cold fury made me open it. Honey, can you come over? I know things are tense, but I could really use your help. I'm trying to go through Dad's old office papers before we file our taxes. I stared at the text. My first instinct was to ignore it. A week ago, I would have dropped everything to help. But the woman who sent that text wasn't a mother in need. She was a manipulator who had systematically drained my life savings. I showed the text to Diane when she called me a few minutes later. She laughed a dry, incredulous sound. Don't go, Amelia. It's a trap. But something in me felt like I had to. I needed to see their faces again to feel the power I had over them now. I wanted to see them squirm. And a small, very foolish part of me hoped I could find more answers. So 2 days after Christmas, I found myself pulling up to the house. It looked just as it had on Christmas Eve, with the wreaths on the doors and the white lights twinkling around the windows. The picture of perfect domestic bliss, a lie I had bought for years. I walked in and the tension was so thick I could almost taste it. My mom was surprisingly quiet. She didn't mention Christmas dinner, she didn't apologize, and she didn't ask about the money. She simply handed me a box of files. It's all from your father's old desk, she said, her voice tight. Just go through it and sort out what we need to keep for the accountant. I went up to Dad's office, a room I'd always avoided. It was a dusty, silent space, filled with old blueprints, technical manuals, and financial documents. The air was heavy with the smell of old paper and dust. I started sorting through the files, my mind a million miles away, still replaying every moment of that awful Christmas dinner. My hands moved mechanically, sorting through decades-old tax returns and utility bills. I was about to give up when I found a small locked box tucked away in a corner of the closet, hidden beneath a pile of old coats. I felt a jolt of pure curiosity. My dad was a very private man. He didn't lock things unless they were a secret. I found an old, rusty key in the back of one of his drawers, and with a soft click the box opened. Inside I found two things. One was a small stack of $20 bills. The other was a small leather-bound notebook. It looked like an ordinary journal, but as I opened it, my blood ran cold. The pages were filled with my mom's neat, precise handwriting. It wasn't a journal at all. It was a ledger. My ledger. Every single payment I had ever made to them was meticulously recorded. The date, the amount, the reason. Mortgage payment. January 2018, $1,200. Student loan for Isabel. July 2018, $2,500. Credit card bill for Isabel's clothes. November 2019. $900. It was all there, a horrifying timeline of my life savings being drained month by month, year by year. But as I flipped through the pages, I saw something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My mom had been keeping notes. Beside each entry for a mortgage payment was a small note about their actual financial situation. Had a good month. Richard's investments are up. Mortgage payment covered. We can put the extra money into savings. My stomach churned. The financial hardship had been a lie. A carefully crafted lie. They hadn't needed my money. They had just wanted it. They were using my income to pad their own savings. But the most damning entry was on the last page. In a separate section, my mom had written out a number, and next to it an account number. Dad's secret account. Transfer balance on the 15th. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the book. The number was a staggering amount, hundreds of thousands of dollars. The money my dad had made from his investments, the extra they didn't need for the mortgage, all of it was going into this secret account. I closed the notebook, a cold rage settling over me. The betrayal I felt was so deep, it felt like a physical pain. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the lies, the manipulation, the way they had orchestrated this entire charade, all while looking me in the eye and telling me they loved me. I had to get out of there. I grabbed the notebook, stuffed it into my purse, and walked downstairs. My mom was in the kitchen humming. She looked up at me with a questioning glance. "All done, honey?" she asked. I just nodded, a stone-cold expression on my face. She didn't notice. She was too busy living in her own little world of perfect deception. I left without another word, clutching my purse tightly. I had all the proof I needed now. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. After I left the house with the notebook clutched tightly in my purse, the cold rage that had consumed me began to thaw, replaced by a deep and profound sense of betrayal. The car ride home was a blur. I didn't even think to turn on the radio. The only sound was the thump of my own heart against my ribs, a steady drumbeat of anger and shock. The notebook was a physical testament to their deception. It wasn't just my word against theirs anymore. I had proof, irrefutable evidence that their financial hardship had been a lie. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to work. I called in sick, telling my boss I had come down with the flu. In reality, I was too emotionally raw to look at a computer screen. I needed to talk to someone who would understand, someone who wouldn't try to make excuses for my parents. I picked up my phone and saw a few missed calls and texts from Diane. I knew she was the person I needed. We met at a small coffee shop near her apartment in downtown Austin. The place was warm and smelled of cinnamon and coffee, a welcome escape from the icy reality of my family. I ordered a hot cocoa, and Diane got a black coffee. We didn't talk much at first. She just let me sit there, a silent acknowledgement of the weight I was carrying. Finally, I started talking. I told her everything, beginning with the awful Christmas dinner and the way my dad had looked at me. I recounted how they had called me a failure, how I had dropped the financial file on the table, and how they had tried to justify their actions. Diane just listened, her expression a mix of sympathy and grim satisfaction. I told her about going back to the house, about the fake apology from my mom, and about finding the notebook. I pulled it out of my bag and slid it across the table. "It's all in here, Diane. Every penny. And a separate list of my dad's investments and a secret bank account. They've been lying to me this whole time." Diane carefully picked up the notebook, her fingers tracing the neat, precise handwriting. She flipped through a few pages, her eyes scanning the columns. Her face, which was usually so full of life and laughter, was now hardened. "I knew it," she said, her voice low. "I knew it." I looked at her confused. "What do you mean you knew it?" I asked. "I've been telling you for years that something was off. Remember that time they went to the Bahamas and told everyone they got the trip for free? I saw your mom's new designer purse. It wasn't a clearance item, Amelia. I told you that you were being taken advantage of, but you always defended them." A fresh wave of hurt washed over me. Diane was right. I had been so blind, so desperate to believe that my parents loved me, that I had convinced myself that their financial requests were a legitimate sign of their trust in me, not a symptom of their greed. Diane closed the notebook and looked at me, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. They're not just your parents, Amelia. They're con artists. They saw you as a source of money and they used you to fund Isabel's life. It's a classic case of family exploitation. Her words, though harsh, were exactly what I needed to hear. They validated my feelings. They gave me permission to be angry, to feel betrayed, and to stop making excuses for them. So what do I do now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I have the proof. I have all the numbers. But what's the next step? I can't just show it to people. My whole family will turn against me. They've already turned against you, Diane, said her voice firm. You need to fight back, not just with words, but with action. You have to make them understand that you're not their bank account anymore. You need to talk to a lawyer, a professional who understands family finance and what's legal and what isn't. You need to know your rights. A lawyer. The word felt so foreign, so cold. I had never considered anything so drastic. A lawyer, I said, my voice filled with doubt. For my own parents, that's crazy. It's not crazy, Amelia. It's smart. They've been taking advantage of you for years. This isn't just about money. This is about them lying to you, manipulating you. You have a right to be angry, and you have a right to protect yourself. I have a friend who is an attorney specializing in these kinds of cases. He's tough, but he's fair. And he's good. You should at least talk to him. The idea of involving a third party, a lawyer, felt like I was crossing a line I could never uncross. But as I sat there looking at the notebook on the table between us, a new feeling took hold. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a calm, quiet resolve. I wasn't just going to let this go. They needed to know that their actions had consequences. I needed to stand up for myself, for the 20-something-year-old version of me who was too naive to see the truth. I finished my cocoa and pushed my cup away. Okay, I said, a new confidence in my voice. Make the call. The game wasn't just a game anymore. It was a fight. And I was ready to win. It was no longer just a gut feeling. It was a mission. And I was ready to win. Diane set up the meeting for me with her family friend, a retired lawyer named Mr. Thompson. I was nervous, but Diane told me that she had given him a rundown of the situation and that he was willing to hear me out. I was a bit surprised when she told me his name. Peter Thompson. My uncle, my father's brother. I hadn't seen him in years. He and my dad had a falling out years ago, and my parents had always refused to talk about it. They had just told everyone that Peter was too difficult to deal with. Now I had a feeling I might find out what that really meant. The following Saturday, I drove out to his home in the quiet suburbs of Austin. It was a small, cozy house with a porch swing and a meticulously kept rose garden. It was the complete opposite of my parents' sprawling, impersonal colonial house. The front door opened before I could even knock. Uncle Peter stood there, a kind smile on his face. He was a tall man with the same strong jawline as my father, but with kind, knowing eyes that didn't hold a hint of the judgment I was so used to. Amelia, he said, his voice warm. Come in. It's been a long time. We sat in his living room, surrounded by bookshelves filled with old books. He offered me a cup of tea, and as I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. I showed him the notebook. I had it placed on the coffee table between us. I recounted everything that had happened, from the moment Dad had called me a failure at Christmas dinner to my discovery of the secret ledger. I explained how Isabel was unaware of my payments and how my parents had been lying about their financial situation for years. As I spoke, Uncle Peter just listened, his expression never changing. When I finished, he didn't say anything for a long time. He just took a slow sip of his tea and looked out the window. I'm not surprised, he said quietly. Your father, he's always had a difficult relationship with money and with power. He always felt like he was owed something, that he was the golden child, and the world should give him everything he wanted. I looked at him shocked. He was talking about my dad like I knew him. He had a lot of success as an engineer, but he always felt like it wasn't enough. He wanted more, but he didn't want to work for it. He paused, a look of sadness in his eyes. That's why we had our falling out. He came to me once asking me to help him with some shady business dealings. He said he had an investment that was guaranteed to make him rich, but he didn't have the capital. I told him no. I told him what he was doing was illegal. He didn't take it well. He said I was selfish, that I was holding him back from his full potential. He cut me off completely after that. Suddenly, everything made sense. My parents' constant need for control, their obsession with appearances, the way they used me to fund their lives. It was all rooted in the same character flaws that had ruined Uncle Peter's relationship with them. So what do I do now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Is this even legal? Uncle Peter gave me a small, sad smile. Legally, it's a complicated matter. It's very difficult to sue your own parents for financial exploitation, especially when you gave them the money willingly. On paper, these were gifts, not loans. We could try to argue a case of fraud and financial abuse, but it would be a long, messy, and public battle. You would have to prove that they intentionally deceived you with the intent to harm you. My heart sank. So all of this was for nothing. I had all this proof, all this rage, but I couldn't do anything about it. I was powerless. But he said, and I looked up at him, just because it's not a legal victory doesn't mean it's not a victory. You have the truth. You have evidence that proves everything you said. That's a powerful weapon. Your parents are all about appearances, Amelia. They care about what people think. The threat of legal action, even if it never goes to court, would be a huge deal for them. It would make them stop. It would make them listen. His words hit me like a revelation. I didn't want to go to court. I didn't want to ruin their lives. I just wanted them to stop. I wanted them to admit what they had done was wrong. I wanted to be free. He was right. I had all the power I needed. I had the truth. Uncle Peter stood up and walked over to a bookshelf. He pulled out a large, heavy book and handed it to me. This is a book on financial law. Read it. Educate yourself. They used your ignorance to take advantage of you. Don't let them do that ever again. I took the book from him, its weight a physical manifestation of the responsibility I was now taking on. And if you need me to be there, he continued, for a meeting or a conversation, just ask. I'll be there. I thanked him and walked out of his house, the book clutched tightly in my hands. I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a fighter. I wasn't going to let them win. My parents wanted a family meeting, and I was going to give it to them. But this time, it would be on my terms. I had all the proof I needed, and I had a witness. The confrontation was coming, and I was ready. I was ready. My meeting with Uncle Peter had given me more than just legal advice. It had given me a weapon. A powerful, unassailable weapon. The truth. I felt a sense of calm and clarity I hadn't known in years. I knew what I had to do. I was no longer the victim. I was the one in control. A week later, my parents called. They wanted to have a family meeting to clear the air. I knew exactly what that meant. They wanted to put me on the spot to guilt me back into paying their bills. They didn't know I had a secret weapon of my own. I told them I would be there, but only if we had a proper, respectful conversation. On Sunday afternoon, I drove to the house. The tension was palpable. My mom opened the door, a forced, tight smile on her face. Amelia, honey, come in. We just want to talk. I walked past her, my spine straight, and sat down at the living room table. Dad was already there, looking impatient. He didn't even acknowledge me. Where's Isabel? I asked. She's at work, Mom said quickly, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. She has some big deadline. We'll talk to her later. We wanted to talk to you first. I almost laughed. They wanted to gang up on me, to use their combined force to make me give in. Well, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. I'm not going to be able to talk about this alone. Just then, the front door opened and Uncle Peter walked in. He was wearing a smart blazer and carrying a briefcase. Dad's face went white. Mom's forced smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure shock. Peter, Dad, said his voice barely a whisper. What are you doing here? Uncle Peter just smiled, a calm, knowing smile. Amelia asked me to be here, he said, taking a seat next to me. She wanted me to be a witness. Dad's eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and rage. He knew what this meant. He knew I wasn't there to be guilted into anything. He knew I had come prepared. "This is a family matter," he said, his voice now a low growl. "You have no right to be here." "I have every right," Uncle Peter said, his voice calm and firm. "Amelia is family. And I will not allow you to take advantage of her anymore." I took a deep breath. "Dad, Mom, let's be honest. This isn't a family meeting. This is a business negotiation. And I'm ready to negotiate." I took out the manila folder with my financial records and the notebook. Dad's eyes widened when he saw the notebook. He knew exactly what it was. His face turned a deep shade of red. "What is that?" he said, his voice shaking. "This," I said, my voice steady as the truth. "You said I was a failure, that Isabel was the golden child. Well, here's the reality. I paid for everything, every single bill, every single trip, every single thing you have. I have a detailed list of every dollar I've spent on you. It's all here, $250,000. I slid the notebook to the center of the table. "And this," I said, my voice dropping, "is Mom's personal ledger. It documents every payment I've ever made. And it also documents your little secret, the bank account you've been stashing money into for years, all while telling me you were barely getting by." Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dad stared at me, speechless. The air was thick with tension. Dad finally broke the silence. "That's a lie," he said, his voice desperate. "That's not real. You've made this all up." "It's not a lie," I said, my voice cold. "I have the account numbers. I have the bank statements. I have everything. You've been lying to me for years." Just then my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Isabel. "We need to talk." I looked at Dad, and he had a panicked look on his face. He knew she had seen the messages from our argument, and he knew she was about to call. He was about to tell her to calm down and not worry when his phone rang. It was Isabel. He quickly rejected the call. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He knew he had lost, but I wasn't done yet. I still had one more thing to say. My voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "And I have one more thing to say. I'm done. I'm done paying for your lives. I'm done being your money. And I'm done with you." I picked up my briefcase and stood up. "The meeting is over." I looked at Uncle Peter, and he nodded, a quiet look of pride on his face. I turned to walk away, leaving them speechless. They had no idea what to do. I had taken away their power, and for the first time in my life I felt truly free. The drive home from my parents' house was silent, but for the first time it was a peaceful silence. I had done it. I had faced them armed with the truth, and I had won. The cold fear that had followed me since Christmas was gone, replaced by a deep and powerful sense of freedom. My phone, which had been buzzing non-stop since I'd left, was now quiet. I had blocked all their numbers, and for a few days it was glorious. It was the first time in my adult life that I wasn't waiting for a call asking for money or a text message guilt-tripping me. I spent the next few days with Diane, who was more than happy to celebrate my victory. We went for long runs and ate at a new vegan restaurant that she had been wanting to try. We talked about everything except my family. It felt good to just be me, not the family ATM, not the disappointing daughter. But the peace was short-lived. A few days later, my phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. "Amelia, it's me. Can we talk?" I knew it was Isabel. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb hovering over the delete button. But a strange curiosity, a desire to know what she thought of all this, made me reply. "Where?" We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near her office. It was a neutral location, and the crowds made it feel safe. I arrived first and ordered a black coffee just like Diane always did. I wanted to feel strong, like I had my life together. When Isabel arrived, she looked tired. The sparkle in her eyes was gone, replaced by a hollow, lost look. She sat down across from me, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Amelia," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "What's going on? Mom and Dad are in a complete panic. They won't tell me anything. They just keep saying you're overreacting and that you're being dramatic." I just looked at her. Her face was a mask of confusion and bewilderment. She genuinely didn't seem to know what was going on. For a moment, a wave of pity washed over me. I'm not being dramatic, Isabel. I'm telling the truth. I slid the financial report from my bag onto the table. You saw this at Christmas. This is a list of every single bill I've ever paid for you and our parents. $250,000. I pointed to the list of her student loans. I've been paying your student loans since I was 22. Her eyes widened in disbelief. What number? That's not right. Mom and Dad said they were paying them. They said you helped them out with a few small things, but that they were handling all my debts. They said they wanted me to focus on my career. They said they were taking care of me. A fresh wave of anger washed over me. They had been lying to her too. But then a thought occurred to me. Maybe she had known. Maybe this was just a performance, a way to make me feel sorry for her. I have proof, Isabel. The proof isn't just in my bank statements. It's in Mom's notebook in her own handwriting. I told her about finding the notebook, the ledger of my payments, and the secret bank account. I watched her face as I spoke. The disbelief slowly turned to something else. Shame, guilt, regret. Amelia, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I knew some of it. I knew they were asking you for money. I didn't know how much. I thought it was just a few $1,000s here and there. They always told me it was my turn to work and to save, and that you were the one with a good job, and that you would always be there for them. She looked down at her hands, tears welling up in her eyes. I know this sounds terrible, but I was so comfortable. I never wanted to ask questions. I just wanted to focus on my career. I thought they were just being helpful. I didn't realize they were using you. Her confession hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just a lie. It was a conspiracy. She had been complicit, a willing participant in my parents' manipulation. But at the same time, she was a victim too. My parents had used her, their perfect golden child, to justify their constant demands on me. They had created a rift between us, and they had succeeded. You were too comfortable, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. And you didn't care enough to ask questions. Isabel looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. I know. I'm so sorry, Amelia. I should have seen it. I should have stood up for you. I was just so caught up in the life they were building for me that I never stopped to think about who was paying for it. She was right. She had been just as much a victim of their lies as I had been. She had been the bait. What are we going to do? She asked, her voice full of fear. We have to fix this. I just stared at her, my mind racing. I had no idea what we were going to do. The game was over, but the wreckage was just beginning to appear. The meeting with Isabel was over, and as I walked away, I felt a strange combination of vindication and sorrow. The anger that had fueled me since Christmas was still there, but it was mixed with the painful reality that my parents had managed to pit us against each other, even without our knowledge. They had used me for my money and Isabel for her ambition. We were both victims of their lies. I had exposed their game, but the wreckage was just beginning to appear, and I knew Isabel was about to face the full weight of it. For the next few days, I stayed in my apartment trying to process everything. The phone was silent. My parents hadn't tried to call again, and Isabel hadn't reached out either. I knew it was the calm before the storm. I went to work, but my mind was a million miles away. I was waiting not for an apology, but for the inevitable collapse of the life they had built on my back. And it came. I didn't see it, but I could feel it. The dominoes began to fall. The first domino was Isabel's financial security. My mom had always told me that Isabel was a master with money, that she had her finances all figured out, but I knew the truth. My parents had been handling all of Isabel's major bills. They had been paying her student loans, her car payments, even her expensive credit card bills. They had been telling her it was a way for her to focus on her career, but in reality, it was a way for them to control her. They had made her completely dependent on them, and now the money was gone. I didn't hear from Isabel for about a week. But then I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it, and a panicked voice on the other end said, "Amelia, it's Isabel. You have to help me. The bank is calling me nonstop. My student loan payment is overdue. They're going to put a lien on my house. I don't know what to do." I just listened, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew this was coming. Isabel, I said, my voice calm. I told you I'm done. I'm not going to pay for your life anymore. She started to cry and I hung up. I felt a pang of guilt, but I knew I had to do this. I had to let her face the consequences of her choices. She had to learn that her parents' love was conditional, that it was tied to her success and her obedience. And she had to learn that her success was an illusion. It was built on a foundation of lies, and now it was crumbling. A few days later, I got a text from Isabel. I can't work. I'm too stressed. I made a mistake on a client's account, and my boss is furious. She said I'm not fit to be a manager. My heart ached for her, but I didn't respond. I knew I had to stay strong. I knew that if I gave in, I would be right back where I started. They would use me again and I would be their ATM for the rest of my life. I knew that this was the karma I had been waiting for. My parents had used me, and now their own daughter was suffering the consequences of their actions. They had put her in a position where she was completely dependent on them, and when they couldn't control her anymore, they let her fall. And I knew that this was just the beginning. The house of cards they had built was collapsing, and they were all going down with it. A few weeks later, Isabel called me again. Her voice was thin, but it held a new tone. Amelia, she said, I went to Mom and Dad. I showed them the bank statements. I told them I knew everything. They just said I was being dramatic. They said I was being ungrateful. They said I should be grateful for everything they've done for me. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this. I just listened, my heart breaking for her. She had been their golden child, and now she was just as much of a victim as I was. We were two pawns in their game, and we had finally been discarded. The game was over. But for me, a new one was just beginning. It was time for me to rebuild my life, to find a new home and a new family, and I knew I had to do it alone. I hung up the phone and started packing. I was ready to leave Austin behind. I spent the next 2 weeks in a whirlwind of packing boxes, filing paperwork, and saying goodbye to a life that no longer fit me. Every box I packed felt like a weight being lifted from my shoulders. It was a physical manifestation of my mental and emotional liberation. My apartment was a testament to the life I had built on my own. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and it was all I needed. My parents, of course, were furious. They had sent a series of angry text messages and left frantic voicemails. You're ruining our lives, my dad's voice had boomed in one message. We have nothing left. You're ungrateful. I just deleted them. They were words from a life that no longer existed. Isabel, on the other hand, had been silent. I knew she was struggling and I felt a pang of sympathy for her, but I also knew I couldn't save her. She had to learn to save herself. I was packing a box of old books when my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Isabel. I almost didn't answer it. My heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to expect. Was she going to ask for money? Was she going to blame me for her problems? I took a deep breath and answered the phone. Hello, I said, my voice shaky. Amelia, she said, her voice thin and small. It's me. I just listened, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm not calling to ask for money, she said, as if she could read my mind. I'm calling to say I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't the dramatic, self-pitying apology I had expected. It was a raw, honest confession. She was apologizing for her silence, for her complicity, for her own blindness. I've been going through everything, she said, her voice full of emotion. I went to Mom and Dad and I showed them the bank statements and they just looked at me like I was crazy. They said I was being ungrateful. I finally realized they were never going to change. And they were never going to stop using us. I was speechless. She was finally seeing the truth. She was finally understanding what I had been trying to tell her for years. I know this doesn't fix anything, she continued, her voice filled with regret. I know I was part of the problem. I was so comfortable and I was so wrapped up in my own life that I never stopped to think about who was paying for it. I was so proud of my success, but it was a fake success. It was built on your hard work. I should have stood up for you. I should have been there for you. I'm so sorry, Amelia. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a feeling of pure, unadulterated relief. This was the apology I had been waiting for my entire life, not from my parents but from my sister. She was finally taking responsibility for her own actions. Isabel the First, said, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry you had to go through this, but I'm glad you finally understand. I am too, she said, her voice filled with a strange sense of calm. I have a lot of work to do. My finances are a mess. I've been working overtime, and I've been talking to a financial advisor. It's harder than I thought, but it's also more satisfying. I'm finally building something of my own, something real. I smiled. She was right. This was her chance to start over, and I was so proud of her. I'm glad to hear that, Isabel, I said, my voice filled with genuine warmth. I'm really, really glad. We talked for another hour about everything and nothing. We talked about her work, my move, and our plans for the future. For the first time in our lives, we were talking as sisters, not as rivals. We were two women who had been used and manipulated, and we were finally taking back our lives. When we hung up, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The conversation with Isabel had been a necessary step in my healing process. I was still hurt, but I was no longer angry. I was ready to move on. I was ready to start a new life. And I knew that no matter what happened, I would always have my sister. She was finally on my side, and that was all that mattered. I packed the last box, sealed it with tape, and labeled it Seattle. My new life was waiting for me, and I was ready to embrace it. I packed the last box, sealed it with tape, and labeled it Seattle. My new life was waiting for me, and I was ready to embrace it. The weeks after my conversation with Isabel were a whirlwind of activity. I put in my 2 weeks' notice at my job. I gave my landlord 30 days' notice, and I began the process of selling my furniture. I was shedding my old life one piece at a time, and it felt exhilarating. My parents, of course, were still furious. They had sent a few more angry text messages, but I had blocked them. I was done with their drama. I was ready to start a new life, a life where I was in control. A life where I didn't have to worry about my parents' demands or my sister's debts. A life where I could finally be myself. I was ready to embrace the unknown, to start over, to build a life that was truly mine. A week later, I received an email from an old colleague. He had just started a new company in Seattle, and he was looking for a senior software engineer. He said he had heard I was looking for a change, and he thought I would be the perfect fit. I was intrigued. I spent the next few days researching the company. It was a small, innovative startup that was working on a project that I was passionate about. It was the perfect opportunity for me. I had a phone interview with the founder, and we hit it off immediately. We talked about our shared passion for technology and our vision for the future. He was impressed with my work and my experience, and he offered me the job on the spot. I was speechless. This wasn't just a job offer, it was a sign that I was on the right path, a sign that I was finally free. The job was everything I had ever wanted. A new city, a new company, a new life. It was a fresh start, a chance to leave my past behind and start over. I accepted the offer immediately. I knew I had to tell my parents. I wasn't doing it to get their approval. I was doing it to give them one last chance to be a part of my life, a chance to show me they were proud of me. I called them a few days later, my heart pounding in my chest. My mom answered the phone, and I could tell she was trying to sound normal. "Amelia, honey, how are you?" she said, her voice filled with a fake warmth. "Mom," I said, my voice steady, "I have some news. I got a job offer in Seattle. I'm moving." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear my dad's voice in the background, and I knew he was listening. "Seattle," my mom said, her voice filled with a mixture of shock and betrayal. But what about us? What about your family?" "This is for me, Mom," I said, my voice firm. "I need to do this for me. I need to start a new life." My dad took the phone from her. "Amelia," he said, his voice a low growl, "you're abandoning us. After everything we've done for you, after all the sacrifices we've made, you're just going to leave." "You're right," I said, my voice cold. "I am leaving. You made your sacrifices, and I made mine. But I'm not going to let you control my life anymore. I'm not going to let you take advantage of me anymore. I'm done." I hung up the phone before he could say another word. I sat there for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. I had done it. I had finally stood up for myself. I had finally told them that I was no longer their puppet. I was a free woman, and I was ready to start my new life. The phone rang a few times, but I ignored it. It was my parents, of course. They would try to manipulate me one last time to get me to change my mind. But I wouldn't. I was a new person now, a strong, independent woman who was ready to take on the world. I packed the last of my boxes, sealed them with tape, and labeled them Seattle. My new life was waiting for me, and I was ready to embrace it. My new life was waiting for me, and I was ready to embrace it. I had been in Seattle for 2 weeks when the call came. My mom. I almost didn't answer, but a small part of me, a part that was still curious about their next move, wanted to hear what she had to say. "Amelia, honey, we're so happy for you," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Your father and I were just talking, and we thought it would be a shame if you left without a proper farewell. We're having a small dinner with some family, friends, and relatives on Saturday. Just a little get-together to wish you well." I was suspicious. This wasn't them. They hadn't called me to congratulate me on my new job. They had called me to try and manipulate me one last time. I was sure of it. But I also knew this was a chance for me to take back control, to have the last word. I said I would be there. The drive from Seattle to Austin was long, but it was filled with a sense of purpose. I was no longer the scared, lost girl who had fled. I was a woman who was in control of her life. I arrived at the house on Saturday afternoon, and the first thing I noticed was the fake smile on my mother's face. She hugged me, a tight, uncomfortable hug, and said, "Amelia, you've been missed. It's so good to have you home." But her eyes were cold and her body was stiff. She was a woman playing a part, and she was not a good actress. The house was filled with people I had known my entire life. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins. They all came up to me and asked me about my new job, about Seattle, about my future. I answered their questions with a smile. I didn't hide anything. I was proud of my accomplishments, and I wasn't going to let my parents' lies overshadow my success. My parents, of course, were in the middle of it all, playing the perfect hosts. My dad was telling a story about a big promotion he got, and my mom was telling everyone how proud she was of Isabel's new job. I just watched them, my heart a stone in my chest. After dinner, my dad stood up and clinked his glass. "I just wanted to say a few words," he said, his voice a little too loud. "We're all so proud of Amelia. She's moving to Seattle to start a new job, and we're so happy for her. It's a big step, but we know she's going to do great things. We're so proud of both our daughters." He smiled and everyone clapped. It was a perfect little performance, a final attempt to convince everyone that we were a perfect little family. I stood up. My parents' eyes widened in alarm, but they couldn't stop me. "Thank you, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "But I think we should be a little more honest about what's going on." My parents' faces went white. "I want to talk about the real reason I'm here, the real reason I'm leaving." My dad started to protest, but I just held up my hand. "No, Dad, it's my turn to talk." I pulled out the manila folder with my financial records and the notebook. A low murmur went through the crowd. $250,000, I said, my voice clear and loud. "That's how much I've paid for this house, for Isabel's student loans, for every single bill, every single trip, every single thing you have." My parents were speechless. "And this," I said, holding up the notebook, "is Mom's personal ledger. It documents every payment I've ever made, and it also documents the secret bank account you've been stashing money into for years, all while telling me you were barely getting by." My mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My dad stared at me, his face a mask of shock and fury. I looked at Isabel, who was standing in the back of the room, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and shame. I walked over to her, the manila folder in my hand. "Isabel," I said, my voice soft, "this is for you. It's a copy of every single payment I've made on your behalf. Everything they told you was your own hard work was actually a lie. They used you just like they used me. I handed her the folder. She looked at it, then at me, then at our parents. My dad finally found his voice. "Amelia, what are you doing?" he screamed, his voice filled with a desperate rage. "You're ruining our lives, you're embarrassing us." But it was too late. Everyone was looking at them, their faces filled with a mixture of shock and disgust. They had been exposed. The perfect little family was a lie, and I was the one who had exposed it. I just smiled. "I'm not ruining your lives, Dad. You did that yourselves. I'm just telling the truth." I turned around and walked out of the house. I didn't look back. I just walked. I walked past the beautifully decorated Christmas tree, out the front door, and into the cold night air. The icy wind felt like a breath of fresh air, a cleansing sensation after years of suffocation. I got into my car and drove away, leaving behind the Christmas lights, the fake smiles, and the people who had taken everything from me. It was over, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. I got into my car and drove away, leaving the perfect facade of my family's life to crumble behind me. The feeling of freedom was overwhelming, a rush of pure air after years of suffocation. For the first time, I wasn't running away. I was running towards something, my new life in Seattle. My life in Seattle was a new beginning in every sense of the word. My apartment, a small place with a view of Puget Sound, was a sanctuary. My job at my new company, a small startup, was exactly what I had hoped for. The work was challenging and fulfilling, and my colleagues were passionate and supportive. I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't. I didn't have to worry about my finances or my parents' demands. I was finally in control. I settled into a new routine, finding comfort in the rhythm of my new life. I would wake up early, go for a run along the water, and then head to work. My days were filled with new projects, new challenges, and new friendships. I was building a life that was truly my own, a life that was free from the lies and manipulation of my past. My phone, which had been a constant source of anxiety, was now just a tool. My parents had tried to call me a few times, but I had blocked their numbers. Isabel had texted a few times, but I had ignored her. I knew she was dealing with her own problems, and I didn't want to get involved. I needed to focus on myself. A few weeks later, an email from Isabel appeared in my inbox. I almost deleted it, but a strange curiosity made me open it. I was glad I did. The email was a long, detailed confession. She told me about the fight she had with our parents after I left. She told me how they had tried to manipulate her, how they had tried to make her feel guilty for questioning them. She told me that she had finally realized that their love was conditional, that it was tied to her success and her obedience. She was just as much of a victim as I was. She told me about her new job. She was still a project manager at Evergreen Financial, but she had started taking on new responsibilities. She was working overtime and she was saving money. She was finally taking control of her life. She was proud of herself. She had finally realized that her success was not about the money or the title, but about her own hard work and determination. She said that she had gone to our parents' house and had a long talk with them. She told them that she was no longer going to be their puppet. She told them that she was done with their lies and manipulation. She told them that she was taking over their mortgage payments. Our parents were furious, of course, but she didn't care. She was finally free. I read the email, my heart swelling with pride. My little sister, the one who had always been the golden child, had finally stood up for herself. She had finally seen the truth. She had finally realized that her parents' love was not a gift but a weapon. The email ended with an apology. "I'm so sorry, Amelia," she wrote. "I should have seen it. I should have stood up for you. I was so caught up in the life they were building for me that I never stopped to think about who was paying for it. I'm so sorry. I know this doesn't fix anything, but I hope you can forgive me." Tears streamed down my face as I read her words. I was filled with a sense of peace and relief. She had finally understood. She had finally seen the truth. She had finally taken responsibility for her own life. I wrote her back immediately. My reply was short, but it was honest. "I forgive you, Isabel," I wrote. "I'm proud of you. Let's rebuild our relationship. And if you ever want to visit me in Seattle, you're always welcome." I closed my laptop that evening, a quiet sense of satisfaction settling over me. The revenge was complete. But it wasn't a revenge of anger. It was a revenge of truth. I had exposed their lies, and in the process I had found my own truth. I had found my own peace. I had found a new life, a new home, and a new family. I realized that my family wasn't just my parents. My family was Diane, my best friend, who had always been there for me. My family was Uncle Peter, who had given me the courage to fight. And my family was Isabel, who had finally seen the truth and had decided to stand with me. My parents remained unchanged, but I had changed, and that was all that mattered. I had found my own happiness, my own freedom, and my own family, and I knew that no matter what happened, I would always be okay. I had a choice to make. I could try to rebuild a relationship with my parents who had proven unwilling to change, or I could focus on nurturing the connections with those who respected my boundaries. I chose the latter. I chose to focus on my own happiness, and I knew that was the best revenge of all. I'd like to hear what you would have done in my place. Would you have forgiven them? Would you have tried to rebuild a relationship with those who refused to change? Or would you have moved on and focused on nurturing new connections? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.